Devil, my friend. Fashion. Things to wear. Possibly faces covered, but more importantly, covering up the bodies. Merch. We have that now. We are very, very excited to announce that Vampire and the Devil have partnered with our friends at Rock and Horror Apparel. They are now taking care of the actual merch, the exclusive merch for the Vampire and Devil podcast, modeled by our very sexy devil right here.
Oh, yeah.
But we have all kinds of goodies to share with you.
Got the hoodies, we got some shirts, we got some tanks coming up, we got some booty shorts, we got all the stuff you want to wear from the Vampire and Devil podcast, thanks to Rock and Horror.
Horns up, fangs out. Devil, my friend, we've got a lot of interesting topics to discuss on this episode there, sir. We're going to talk a little bit about sicknesses. We're going to talk a bit about some torture. We're going to talk a bit about witches and warlocks. I feel that can only mean one topic as we get into a brand new director's special. What do you say we talk about the great Eli Roth?
Oh, yeah, we just, the previous episode that airs before this one, we went into the revenge and we went into the torture and everyone's like, oh my God, why not Eli Roth movies? Well, there's a reason why. Because we were going to talk about Eli right afterwards. So we're like, why we're going to add movies to that when we can talk about the man himself? And, we've done some older directors and stuff like that. And even though I wouldn't consider Eli a new director, he is a newer director versus some of the directors we've done so far. He's the youngest of all the directors that we've talked about so far. So in theory, he is the newer director that we're talking about. But yes, we're going to talk about Eli Roth's career, where it goes from crazy to what the hell to, oh my God, this is even more scarier and more horrifying than any of the stuff that he's done, to some controversial stuff that some people don't really like to talk about, whether it's in real life stuff or taking on movies that people like. I don't know, man. I didn't really like it, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Absolutely.
All Eli Roth.
Oh, man, absolutely. And and you're right. That's the thing. I mean, even when we were discussing torture, you're like, yeah, that's where my mind went directly. And then it was like, oh, that's true. But we do have plans to have this discussion. So, while it wouldn't be the first time that we, go back over a movie we've done in a showdown, they were so close together that it was like, well, it doesn't really make sense to pick a coup de grace torture movie for Eli Roth, when we know that the Eli Roth episode is only going to be like a few weeks later. So that definitely made sense, as opposed, other times where it was like, well, yeah, we're going back over this movie, but that movie was in our showdown 6 months ago. So definitely interesting in that. But yeah, it's definitely going to be cool. And yeah, he does, I guess, just simply in comparison to our other directors, seem like sort of a new director. Because, we're coming off having conversations where these guys had, upwards of 50 movies that they've directed and stuff, as opposed to, Eli, where we're really only going to focus on, 8 to 10 movies, based on his specific catalog. Because, there'll be other opportunities for us to talk about him in acting roles, because he's definitely been in some cool ones. But we, like you said, are going to focus on Eli Roth, the director. And being that this gentleman was a recent interview of ours, that as of the recording of this episode, we will post that interview when we see fit. But let's start it off with the movie that really started it off for Eli Roth, and that is Cabin Fever, with our friend James DeBello.
Yeah. I mean, Cabin Fever was one of those movies where it's like, you get a lot, especially with these newer directors, sometimes you get movies that they start off with a bang. Sometimes you get these ones where, maybe they work their way into, movies that might define them or kind of get them into the name of like great directors and big directors. And it's like Eli Roth, man. I mean, that's you're starting off with Cabin Fever. I remember going to see this in theaters, like not even knowing who this guy was. It's like, oh man, looks like a cool movie. And you had some establishing actors and actresses that were in this movie. The big one is the main star kid from television's, Ryder Strong, everybody knows him, so stuff like that. You had him, you had, James, we talked about James DeBello, and, you had a couple of the other actors and actresses that people knew. But it was like, it was one of those movies where it was just like, you know, watching trailers and seeing the whole premise of this movie where, you're kind of stuck in this cabin and you're not quite sure what's going on. And there's, maybe some kind of virus or some kind of sickness goes around. Like what would you do, if one of your friends, contracts a disease that you think that's this way, like, what are you going to do? And it kind of gets into that social norm of like, maybe they didn't play it the way that they probably should have. I mean, there was one guy that was probably the smartest guy out of all of them, but he was a dick, but he was definitely the smartest of them all to an extent. But yeah, but it's like, yeah, it's like, like I said, this starts off with a bang, and it kind of gets Eli straight up, that beginning, you know what I mean? He defines himself as a director straight up. You're gonna get comedy a little bit. You're gonna get a lot of weird shit. You're gonna get some torturous stuff. You're gonna get a lot of graphic stuff, and he's gonna be a graphic director where he's all about practical effects and getting that grossness and getting that ooh factor into it.
No, absolutely, for sure. And I mean, it's a very cool concept. Yep, Joey Kern, who we mentioned, he's the smartest guy, but he's a dick. But you understand, because also it's about the stresses of why you're acting the way that you are. And, again, also the movie's got Jordan Ladd, who we've discussed, has made appearances in other movies that we've talked about. But yeah, a very, very cool concept. Just basically these kids just doing kid stuff, almost kind of Spring Break style, or probably a better example would honestly be Evil Dead. It's really just friends, going into a cabin just to do friends things, just to party and maybe have a little bit of fun and, throw back a couple beers and just kind of and go from that. And the premise of the story is based around, a disease that is circulating that area and an infection, and they get infected by it, eventually realizing that an infected body kind of fell into the reservoir. And that's what kind of spread the disease the quickest. But also, of course, there's a little bit of that, body on body contact as well that allows for things to be spread as well, biting, any kind of blood being drawn, things of that. But it's a really, really unique, concept and premise. You've got the characters, various love interests, or just people that they care about because they're friends, and seeing them getting sick, reacting in bad ways. You had, the main girl's character who is just kind of rotting away in front of your eyes. You had James DeBello's character who was suffering more of that kind of slow burn in infection, where he's just basically, while there's terror in everybody's, hearts and minds when it comes to this, you could also really see James's like mental breakdown, as he's trying to stay alive, doesn't know what's happening to his friends, realizing that he's getting sick himself. And then ultimately there's, one of the craziest scenes that everybody always does remember from that, which is the leg shaving scene in the shower, which I even remember hearing Eli say himself that one of the best comparisons that he ever, was told in like compliment of his movie is that Cabin Fever did for shaving your legs what Jaws did for going to the beach, which is a massive compliment, because that was, people genuinely were not going to water because of Jaws. But the idea of like people now being paranoid to do just basic hygiene man, then you know that your movie struck a chord with people.
Yeah, yeah, and it's cool too because it's got like that weird, like, you're not 100% sure when you're getting into this movie what kind of movie it is too,
Yeah.
because it's got a lot of that redneck kind of like, is it going to be one of the like, hills have eyes, or wrong turn kind of feel, because it has that. But yeah, I love that. I mean, and like you said, you obviously have James DeBello's character, which we did the interview with, and he, everybody knows him from Detroit Rock City, and you also had another Detroit Rock City,
Yep.
actor in it with his buddy playing the cop man, playing, yeah, man, you're the party man, the party man. So it was cool to see, those two, actors getting to work together again and see some interactions with that. But yeah, it was one of those movies, like, especially like I said, especially going to see it in the theaters, man. It was just like, like I said, the oohs and the ahs and the, oh my god, scenes were all like that too. But there were like two particular scenes that I thought was funny being in a theater, and that's what I love about the interactions of seeing movies in the theater. Now, there's the one scene in the beginning, towards the beginning of the movie, they're going into the redneck station, to get their drinks and get their gas and all that, and there's a old, crusty dude with the beard, an old man. He's got a shotgun above his, above his breast, his clerk area and stuff like that, and they will ask him, what's the shotgun for? And he says it's for for the black folks. He says the N word, of course, but and everybody. I remember, like, seeing a lot of people in the theater, especially like I said, being a multi-racial theater there.
Yeah.
You had some of them like go, oh my god, what the hell did he just say? Like, fuck this guy, you know what I mean? Like, gave this, like, oh my god, I can't believe he said that word and whatever like that. Blah blah blah. And then you fast forward towards the end of the movie, because you completely forget about that for a minute, get back into the movie and stuff like that. End of the movie comes, bunch of black people start coming into the shop, and you're like, oh god, this is where it's gonna go, because obviously these guys are from the sticks and the hicks, and they're obviously all racists, like that. And then they go, oh, yeah, what's up, homie? And they're like, yeah, yeah, I cleaned your shotgun, I cleaned your gun off, and everyone's like, aha. And everybody who was all pissed off to begin with for that guy saying the word that shouldn't be said, which yeah, I don't blame them for that. But yeah, all of a sudden you find out, oh yeah, he wasn't racist. He was legitimately cleaning and making these things for that. So I just thought that was funny, because it was something that, like, if you first watched this movie at your home, you wouldn't be, it'd be different. You would still go, oh my god, I can't believe that guy said that word. Yeah,
Yeah.
obviously that dude is probably a racist, because the stereotype of white rednecks, in the middle of the south of somewhere. Oh yeah, and then seeing that, you're like, oh okay, yeah, yeah, that's why he said that. But it was cool to see that interaction of that, in a live theater and live setting, especially with people who've never seen the movie before. So,
Yeah.
like I said, you could have, like myself, I was assuming too the same thing. I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, old dude's a racist, and then you find out, he's really not. He's an entrepreneur.
He's just one of the bros. But
Yeah.
it is funny, Devil, because yeah, that scene actually reminds me a lot of a scene from a movie a few years before that I also saw in the theater that got a little bit of a reaction. Not from me, not that I'm downplaying those type of, like, remarks or anything, but coming from the character it came from, could you really be that shocked? And that was Freddy versus Jason with Kelly Rowland's character from Destiny's Child. And there's the scene when she's talking shit to Freddy, and is like, yeah, trying to act all big and bad, and it's like, hey, what kind of dick murders people in a Christmas sweater? And Freddy just looks at her and he's like, dark meat. And it got a rise out of my theater. And my reaction was kind of like, hush. Like, I get it. I do. I know why you're reacting. But it came from Freddy Krueger. He's got 7 movies of that type of talk. The whole character is built around this, child murderer, child molester that got what was coming to him and getting his revenge, but that he's always had a sharp tongue, and an unapologetic way of speaking. So the fact that he, you bust that out in a movie in like 2001 or whatever, 2002, whatever it was, my reaction was kind of like, really? You're going to let that ruffle your feathers? Well, I get it again. I understand. But keep in context the character that said it versus I definitely understand in Cabin Fever where it's said so clearly that way by people who are stereotypically racist would of course garner that much more of a looking around. So it just kind of reminded me of that early scene, but I do feel like the Cabin Fever one comes across as more of a, no type scene because of the person that said it versus the person that said it in Freddy versus Jason, where it's like, yeah, but that he's just that kind of dick.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what's cool about too of this, with Eli. Like I said, this being his first movie and stuff like that, that he's not afraid to kind of go to those, taboos and stuff like that. Because, like I said, if it didn't have that scene at the end, which he knew he was already doing that, but he knew like that was gonna cause some kind of stir until you get to that point where you knew you're gonna be like, okay, yeah, yeah, I get it. And that's just cool, it's the things like, like I said, he's a huge fan of like Quentin Tarantino, and Quentin Tarantino, has been told by a lot of people. Samuel L. Jackson has said that he's one of the, only directors that puts that word into his scripts and legitimately puts it in his script. Samuel L. Jackson's always like, hey, directors are always telling him to add those words or add this words and all that, which I thought was cool. And another thing that kind of binds, Quentin Tarantino too is I love the fact that Eli's first movie directing, he's gonna do what a lot of my favorite directors do too. He's gonna put himself in the movie, man, and he puts himself as the dude that's walking around with, looking for some weed with his dog. I think it's cool that you're just gonna be like, hey man, this is what Eli is gonna do. He's not only is he gonna make kick-ass movies and killer movies, but he's gonna put himself into these movies too. And like I said, and not putting himself in like, you know, and maybe not boasting as much as Quentin Tarantino does, but where he puts himself as a main character, where at least Eli is putting himself in a movie just for something, just a quick little cameo to have. But I love that, and like I said, obviously as we talk on more about Eli Roth's movies, we'll mention that he does that. But I love how it's like, very first movie, he's just like, yep, I'm putting myself into this.
No, absolutely, for sure. One other scene that I want to touch on before, we talk briefly about the end of the movie and then continue on in the filmography is, I mean, one of the craziest scenes, of course, that, is the combination of that, like, just bad, like, sadness for this couple mixed with taking advantage of, mixed with shock value, is, of course, the two young lovers scene when the girl's already been quarantined, she's already very sick, and the guy's kind of trying to lie with her, kind of trying to console her, but then also kind of trying to get a piece, where runs his hand into her pants to handle the biz that guys do in those situations, to then pull it out where it's just completely covered in various blood and matter and stuff like that as her body's rotting away from all places, which was definitely a shock scene as well, because that's just a crazy, way. That's a crazy scene to put into a movie, especially stemming from something that, with consent is part of pleasure, it's part of foreplay, but then is also somewhat taboo, of course, when you're trying to do something when you're not invited, and then to have such a lack of a payoff in a graphic way is definitely a crazy scene to put in. And then as we move back towards the end of the movie, again, where everybody's getting infected, they're all realizing what caused all of these things, you kind of forget about Joey Kern's character, because he is basically run off, told everybody to go fuck themselves, and that he's not going to be involved in all this, grabs his jacket, grabs his beers and covers his mouth and runs off. You realize that he's still a thing, and he kind of wakes up the next day, a couple days later or whatever, still a survivor, still completely healthy, realizing that he's not, you know, hurt in any way, leaves the cabin feeling so good about himself, celebrating, like, I'm alive, I've made it, I've beaten this, to then just get fucking sprayed down by a hail of gunfire from the local police.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's cool too. You know, like you were talking about, you know, with him, you know, going after her and touching her and stuff like that, and the blood and stuff like that. Yeah, you kind of go that, and then you know he does. We have that scene where he has consensual sex, and
Yep.
that's when they figure out that the main thing that they figure out was the water, and Ryder's character in this movie never once drank any of the water, so he like that, but he did have unprotected sex with someone who did drink the water, and therefore so it's a little bit of that too. Like, hey man, kids, if there's a disease going around in your cabin, make sure you wrap your tool. Don't be a fool.
Yeah, 100%.
or you end up like Ryder Strong, dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, you gotta love that. Like I said, it's it got that little bit of like kind of playing to it, but then like I said, going into Cabin Fever, it's just it's brutal, it's graphic, it's got a little bit, that stuff like that, and then you go into what essentially is probably everybody's Eli Roth's #1 movie that most people know him for. Like, I mean, a lot of horror fans know about Cabin Fever and stuff like that, but when you say Eli Roth's name, the first thing that mainly comes out of anyone's mouth is The Hostel, and that's where
Absolutely.
we're gonna go, man. We're gonna go on a little trip. And word to the wise, if you're ever taking a trip to Europe, and you're going to Amsterdam, and someone says, "Hey man, there's hot chicks in this third world country that you more than likely don't want to go to," don't do it, man. Like I said, you want to talk about like Cabin Fever, talk to what Jaws did for sharks and stuff like that. These movies like Hostel and like Wolf Creek and all that basically almost kind of trying to kill tourism, because it's like, don't go places. I mean, it's not saying not go places, just go where everywhere else is going. You know what I mean? Don't go off that hidden path, and stuff like that. And that's what I love about Hostel was, like I said, they were having a good time in Amsterdam, a bunch of kids and stuff like that, backpacking in Europe and doing all this stuff. They had all the places that they wanted to go to, and all the places seemed safe. And some guy was like, "Hey man, you want real girls, man? Go here." And it's like, yeah, no, I'd have been all right. But then again, if the kids didn't follow and didn't want to go see more exotic women and didn't want to go, we wouldn't have a movie. So
Yeah. 100%. I love Hostel. I've got the little, bloodhound logo from the business cards that they would use to pass around to the the rich men that wanted to fulfill these fantasies. I have it tattooed right on my wrist. I always loved Hostel. I always thought it was a very unique take, and also similar to Wolf Creek around that time. It is exactly what you said. It's like it makes you think twice about tourism. It makes you paranoid. It makes you just kind of worry and wonder. And while it took me a little bit of time to warm up to Wolf Creek, which we'd already discussed about when we talked about Wolf Creek, is the fact that this movie just definitely has that more stylistic appeal to me. But anyway, I love this movie. I love the references. I love the cameos in this movie. I love the fact that they're in room 237. I've got it tattooed on my arm right next to a bloody axe. We do love our Shining. And so shout out again, because we always love our little shout outs to the late great Shelley Duvall. It's just really, really interesting the way that you had mentioned in Cabin Fever about how Eli just makes his appearance in his own movie as like a secondary side character. But now, as he's become more established, even though it's his second movie, you can tell, and he's been in the game for a minute. He's starting to splice in other legends of the genre. And I always love that. You had mentioned, Quentin Tarantino, and he's right there. Eli himself, again, just like in that style, is there again. And my favorite cameo of all of them is Takeshi Miike who is so cool that he's in that movie because I'm a really super nerd for Itchy the Killer.
Yeah. Like you said, and like I said, he puts himself into these small roles, and a lot of them are kind of Easter eggs. Like Eli's part's really nice. You see him in Amsterdam when they're partying. He's over there. They're over there smoking and doing all the stuff they're doing and stuff like that. Talking about fat pigs and stuff like that. So like that, the Quentin Tarantino one's a little bit more harder to usually find. Most people don't realize it. He's in it, and theoretically, he's really not in it. It's
Yeah.
really just his head. Whenever they're going past the rooms, you see like a bunch of heads, and eventually you see Quentin. The guy has like a bunch of heads in his trophy case and stuff like that, and Quentin Tarantino's heads in that. But the Takashi Miike one is always great though, because it's like a lot of people don't realize who he is when you see him, but people who are in the horror genre, I mean, he's probably the greatest of those kind of directing and stuff like that, with those kind of horror movies of the Asian cultures and stuff like that. But yeah, I just love his one where they're going into the hostel area, and they're like, "How is it?" And he's like, "Oh, you'll love it. It's great." So it's so awesome that they doing stuff like that when they're doing that cameo. But like I said, this movie is just it. I've always liked it because it's a fun movie. It just sets it up really well. It's very well written and stuff like that. As far as like a lot of times when you get these movies where people are going to be killed and stuff like that, you usually don't really get these bonds, but you kind of really feel for like these guys, and stuff like that. So it's like you're having fun with them. You're having fun with the Dutch Swede crazy guy that's going around like showing his cock to everybody and doing all the crazy shit and stuff like that. And then it's like then it gets into the movie,
Yep.
where it's just like, yeah, you're gonna get some crazy shit. You know what I mean? You go into a hostel, and all of a sudden, another pro tip from the devil here. If you go into a room, and all of a sudden there's three hot chicks, and they're inviting you to places, yeah, you probably, especially, I mean, other than the Swede dude, the other two guys really weren't the greatest looking dudes in the world. So you're
No.
not pulling these like top model chicks. So yeah, be a little bit more advised and a little bit more cautious when model chicks want to take you out somewhere and give you some drinkage and give you some lovin's, because it's probably not going to end very well. And unfortunately, for anybody who's seen Hostel, it did not work very well for these guys.
No, it definitely didn't because you've got Jay Hernandez's character who's basically the main character of this movie, and then but you also start noticing like little things that also then come circle back around because you see like the Asian girls that that they had kind of noticed when they were you know walking around, and then also in the hostel like area before hostel became a hostage, and then Jay's laying low, disguising himself. It still gets tortured to a certain degree. Has a couple of fingers cut off, and he's trying to like disguise himself. Pass himself off as like a doctor or a person who's like a normal guy. It stumbles across the room that the one of the crazy rich guys is brutally torturing the one of the Asian girls. It's also kind of crazy too because like one of the crazy millionaire guys is talking to Jay about like, hey, how should I do this? Like, what should I do to her? Like, should I do this? Should I do that? He's like, well, I think you should go get this, or you should do it this way. He's like, you know what? That's right. None of this gun bullshit. Torture, old school, slow. And he's just that dude's just many fries short of a happy meal. But her eye is hanging out, and he like tries to help. They clips off the eye, and it's fucking pussing everywhere. But he risks it, obviously his own life just trying to save her for nothing. But it's a very memorable scene in the movie as well.
Yeah. It's just crazy too, and it's like I love how it's like a lot of times with this movie, a lot of callbacks and stuff like that, because where they're traveling around, and this guy comes into their train carriage and stuff like that, and he's a little weird, and he's eating food with his hands, and like don't you want to use a fork? No, I'd rather do this. And then he puts his hand on the one guy, and he's like, they're freaking out, and he's like, oh yeah, and stuff like that. And then eventually you find out that that character is one of the rich bloodhound gang guys, as I call them. I was like, I think they missed the opportunity to put a bloodhound gang song in this movie just because of them having the bloodhound, and they're basically sort of a gang, so
Yeah.
to an extent. So yeah, I mean, those guys are bloodhound gangs guys. But anyway, it's cool, when it goes into that and stuff like that, where you're going into doing all that, which like you said, when he's trying to escape and stuff like that, he's trying to get out of this hostel. Like you said, he's helping this lady out, helping this girl out. That like I said, her eye and her face is all deformed from her eyeball being out. She sees herself like a reflection, and she's like, oh shit, I look like horrible. And then just jumps in front of a train, and you're like, the whole entire time he could have escaped earlier, and then heard her, and then it was like, okay, I'm gonna go help her. And then at the end, she ended up killing herself. I was like, well, that just seems like a whole waste of time. You could have gotten probably scot free longer and stuff like that, which it was cool. And then, like I said, then you just happen to like, gets into the very end where, he happens to go on the hunt and realizes that he sees the dude in the beginning that, now he knows that he's one of these guys, and
Yeah.
he's just gonna go to town on him in the bathroom stall, man. He just fucks them all up.
Oh yeah, he sees the guy that sold him out and is gonna get some revenge on him, and that's the thing that's also kind of crazy too, which is gonna lead us right into Hostel 2, is that it's interesting because Jay, so much that, well, from what you would expect, he gets away scot free. He rids himself. He gets away. He's safe, and then like almost like a cherry on top, he's able to get revenge on this guy in an incredibly brutal way. Because I don't care what you say, there's probably nothing wrong than getting killed in the shitter. But and then that's how the movie kind of ends, with this kind of ultimate semi satisfaction that at the cost of mental trauma, health, and a couple of limbs, a couple of digits, you still feel that, all right, he got some payback. And it goes right into Hostel 2, where just because you think you've escaped these people doesn't mean that they don't know who you are, can't find you, or can't track you down. And it opens up the second movie with, Hernandez is just paranoid dreams of all of that, goes downstairs to get a drink of water or whatever, get some air or whatever it was. And then, his girl goes down to look for him because he hasn't come back to bed. And she comes across his just decapitated, headless corpse just sitting in a chair like he's reading a book. Like, it's a crazy way to start the second movie. And ultimately, you do find out how it works with that. But it was a very interesting way to really attach those two movies, is just because you think you get away doesn't mean that you always do.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what's cool about this movie. Like I said, that continuation from Hostel 1 to Hostel 2. It's such a great like segue into it, because it doesn't, like I said, you could obviously in Hostel 2, there's different characters and there's different people going places, and this time it's predominantly a all female group going to Europe versus the all men's group. But I still love the fact that they added that beginning with him and his character and stuff like that to give you that kind of feel of the combination and stuff like that. But it's not even just that though. I mean, this whole entire movie's got so much good callbacks to the original. Like,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Eventually, when they go and they're going out and they find out to go to this hostel and stuff like that, you go in, you see the teller that was the teller from the beginning. Pulp Fiction is still playing on the TV, because apparently the only movie that
They
they
own.
can, the only movie they own in that area is Pulp Fiction. But I also, like I said, I love the fact that they do that. You have, that, and one character or characters that we didn't mention that were in the original one that get brought back into the second one are the crazy ass freaking bubblegum gang. The
True.
kids, man, who were so freaking brutal in that first movie and just like so awesome. And they just like, like I said, they have such a, that's what they even said in like the one guy was like, yeah, the kids in this area are actually worse than the adults because they're kind of unsupervised and they do whatever they want. And yeah, you see how brutal these kids can be, you know what I mean, in the scene where they're killing every people and shit like that. But I mean, it's got one of my favorite lines where he just like, the little kid just goes bitches,
Yeah.
which I just thought was freaking funny. That I just love, like, like I said, you have these characters and stuff like that that are returning from a Hostel 1 and a Hostel 2 to kind of like set where you kind of think you know where it's gonna go, but then Eli's gonna throw in. He's, obviously you can say, okay, Hostel 1 and Hostel 2. Hostel 2 is just a remake of Hostel 1. I mean, sort of. It's definitely a continuation of this, this gang, this corporation, this evil bloodhound people and stuff like that. So it continues on. But yeah, he definitely. I mean, I know because he flipped a switch because it's girls instead of guys instead this
Right.
time. But I still like it. It just basically just shows you how much immersive this world is and how many people. And then in this one, it kind of shows you how it's done. I know it's I like, in the very beginning when these girls are getting up and you start seeing people's phones and all these rich people, and it's great because they were showing you people who you would have never expected, people on golf courses. As a doctor, while he's doing a surgery, is basically getting the page, and they're all betting on who they want to have and how much money they're willing to pay to kill these guys.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, there's also like so many great other like lines in this because you've got Roger Bart's character who's all like, Buck Rogers and gung ho about shit, yelling out, I am Hercules and like stuff like that. I mean, there's just so many other like great like quotes and like one-liners from this, which I always thought was like so hilarious. Like having this one guy who's like trying to like talk himself up. I am strong. I am Hercules. I think it's just so incredibly like hilarious. And it's also because it's also got a little taste of that kind of like, dude, you're such a dork, man. Like, and I always thought that was like, really funny, but also just like really cool because it's like it leaves those little lasting impressions. Like you've got this one kind of dork kind of guy talking about being super strong. You've got these young asshole kids that are just like, yeah, bitches, to like the cheerleader types. And then also, well, there's so many people who are going to be like, well, it's just a remake. It's not. It's a continuation because you've got, yes, there's the fact that it's not just a gender flip when it comes to the main cast, but it has that distinct different style of like showing various graphic parts where you see the trophy case, of the heads in the first movie, but the beheadings are a major playing in this movie kind of specifically. And that's also where Eli's cameo comes in as well.
Yeah. Again, he's gonna put, obviously, like I said, he's always gonna have his, spot in his movies, and he's just a head, and he throws in a little cameo too when we get into the killing hostile area. There is a guy that's eating, being, I would say, cannibalistic a little bit, and is the director of Cannibal Holocaust, which, if anybody who knows about Eli, he's a huge fan of
Yeah.
Cannibal Holocaust and stuff like that. So it's cool that he got that, and that's what's cool about this movie in general. Like, you have a lot of cool characters, and you have I don't remember the actress's name, but she plays basically the Bathory version, of that. So, you have her, you have the teacher that's, in the very beginning doing the art teacher, who was a predominantly French actress who had quit the genre for years, quit acting in ever, and Eli got to meet her one time, and she said that if you ever make a movie and want me in it, I will come out of retirement and do it. And he was able to bring her back, which, like I said, that just being able to work with people, especially I can imagine with Eli, but with that success of Cabin Fever and Hostel, a lot of these people were like, okay, this guy has definitely got it up and coming. We're willing to do this stuff and stuff like that. And then who doesn't want to be, like I said, when you get that successful Hostel 1, who doesn't want to be in it? You know what I mean? It's like that. It reminds me of, like, we're going a little bit off topic from the Hostel ones, but it reminds me a little bit of like Zombieland. Nobody wanted to be in Zombieland, these actors, when they wanted to portray them and stuff like that. But then when Zombieland became a huge box success, everybody wanted to be in Zombieland too. And it was like, well, yeah, none of you guys wanted to be in my part one, so
Right.
go fuck yourself. And that's what I thought was kind of cool, where it was like, these people wanted to be it, but you can tell the people that he brought in were definitely very genuine. That I mean, they weren't doing it just because it's an Eli movie. It was doing it because it's like, this guy knows. He's, like I said, referred to him as Quentin Tarantino. Quentin Tarantino is just like an old soul, man. He loves those old movies and stuff like that. He's all about bringing people in. Same thing with Rob Zombie. We talk about Rob Zombie. He's always good about
I was just about to bring that.
yeah, bringing in these actors and these old actors of people that he grew up with, idolizing. And Eli's got that kind of feel to him too.
No, absolutely. Yep. I had that right on my brain too, where, you don't think about an actress like Karen Black, and then for a little while. And again, it's not because she's fallen off the earth. She just, it's not even a wind down of the career, just becoming a little bit more choosy in what she, wants to do and wants to associate with, and stuff like that. And then, signs on to do House of a Thousand Corpses, his mother Firefly. And, hey, it didn't work out for the second movie. Rob and Karen couldn't quite agree on certain things, but that's all right. There's no ill will there. But then even also somebody like a Meg Foster, who, I absolutely love as Evil Lynn from Masters of the Universe. But seeing her getting involved in, these other Rob Zombie movies like Lords of Salem is just so super cool. And also, even at an older age, being very comfortable with, the appearance that her character needed to do in Lords of Salem, which was definitely no small feat for any young actress, depending on how comfortable you are with certain things. But even at an older age, when you're not known to be, for lack of a better term, an exotic style actress, to be comfortable with doing something like that for an extreme style role, I think is very, very cool. But I absolutely love that. And then also when it comes to like Hostel 2, of course, like Hostel 1, like Cabin Fever before that, and like the movies we're about to get into, it definitely leaves its impression with memorable scenes, kills, or body modifications. And it's been a little while, Devil, my friend, since you and I have gotten to talk about just a good old-fashioned castration.
No, yeah. I mean, that's what I like about this movie too, because like where you found out in the first movie, it's all about money and stuff like that. You have Roger's character who's kind of like, Robert Roger's character is kind of being shy about it, then eventually you getting into it and stuff like that. And Lauren German's character being like, that going right into it and stuff like that. And you get where she flips the switch and stuff like that, and they're like, they were like, he's like, oh no, let me go, and he's like, oh no, and he's like, well, no, there's only one way you're able to kill. You got to pay for it. And she's like, how much money? And they're like, oh yeah, not taking it serious, not realizing that her father is like a she owns she has the money for multi-billion dollars that she has in her disposal. So she's just like, oh yeah, and they're like, oh, you won't do it, and then yeah, they're like, okay, you okay? We're cool. No, like he's like, what? And then he's like, oh no, if she's willing, if she has that kind of money, yeah, we'll let her do it. It counts. That's because that's all this company is. It's about money. It's just,
Oh yeah.
it's about, it's the prestige of doing that, but it's like it's all about the dollar bills is what rules, stuff like that. So she does that. Takes the old shears to the ding dong ronger. It's been a while since we had a big ding dong being cut. We kind of feel like we need Phyllis Rose because she's the mingled dick expert on this episode.
No.
But it's just brutal. And then like she said, like you found out, you had to get a tattoo. So she gets tattooed, but I love that whole the ending of that movie because it's such a twist. You weren't kind of really expecting it, you know what I mean? But not, no one really expected these girls to be backpacking and having any money because most people who are backpacking in Europe and stuff like that stay at hostels, tend to usually not have very much money. That's why you're staying in hostels versus
Yeah.
staying in like, big lavish hotels and stuff like that. So I love that it flipped the switch. And then, like I said, we talk about, the things that he did, in Cabin Fever. Then all of a sudden this comes in. We talk about, what he did in Hostel 1, kind of puts in the Hostel 2. And then, Eli just kind of keeps like a weird straight line lineage to his movies and to what he does. You had, the cameo for the Cannibal Holocaust cameo from the director goes right into, a movie that, I mean, some will say, some will not say. I mean, it's definitely, to me, in my opinion, it's not a remake, but maybe a homage or like a kind of tip your
100%.
hat to. But Green Inferno, which is very, very similar to, Cannibal Holocaust, way completely different movies altogether, but very, has its similarities too. So it's like, it's just cool that, the next movie he goes right, he goes right from showing the Cannibal Holocaust director in his movie to going to the movie that, a lot of people believe is, remake or retelling, or, like whatever you want to call it. Green Inferno, man, is an awesome movie.
It's so good, man, for sure. And it's one of those things, yeah. I don't think anybody, horror fan or not, if you know Cannibal Holocaust and you know Green Inferno, there, in my opinion, there's no way that anybody could possibly not, you know, reference or think of Cannibal Holocaust when you're watching Green Inferno. I definitely agree with you, though, that I would still catalog it as an homage based on Eli's style and his appreciation, again, for that old head type of thing, that old way of thinking. And, giving credit where credit is due to the movies that helped build the genre. So I don't, there are scenes, yeah, that I can understand there being similar matching points between Inferno and Holocaust, but I wouldn't go so far as to call it a reboot, retelling, or remake. I still think it's its own thing. I still think it stands on its own merits. But again, it's it's like, it's unintelligent people basically messing around in places that they shouldn't be messing in. And while there's a certain amount of, I guess, what would you call it? Like, I guess honorable, to what they're trying to do and shed light on these people and, kind of like third world country kind of references where it's like, hey, these people don't have it as good as we do, but we should, they're worth being acknowledged. We should learn about them. We should understand their sides of things. Some people just don't want to be bothered. They don't want to be noticed. They don't want you in their personal space, and they'll make a bowl out of your tattoo if they need to.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, I get it. It was, this movie very much, the premises of it is basically like, a lot of like, people who are like activists, you know what I mean, want to go out and rally, want to do that. But then, whenever you're doing this and stuff like that, you have that where, unfortunately, the way the world works, and even in this movie too, the premise of it, being that they were going to try to save this, tribe from being bulldozed and stuff like that, and they go and they do and they just stop it, and now they woo-ha, we did it. But then you found out, later on in the movie that it was all facade, that it was literally just a business doing it to try to stop it so that another business could come into it, and you really didn't do shit, which is basically kind of sort of a commentary about how real things are. A lot of times, you have these people who want to, you come out and do all this stuff, free the whales or doing stuff like that. And some of these campaigns are like legitimately true campaigns, they really want to. But you got to realize sometimes these campaigns are just it's just a sheep in wolf's clothing, or a wolf in sheep's clothing, I should say, and sometimes it's not even that. And that's what I like about this movie and stuff like that, where it has that little bit of, that into that into it. But yeah, I think this movie's freaking awesome. It's another one of like that. I love the fact that, within making this movie, they literally went to the Amazon and filmed it.
Mhm.
A lot of the background actors that are the Amazonians, or the people that are in this movie weren't actors. That really try people. They've
Yeah.
never. I saw a thing where they've never seen a movie and they didn't know what a movie was. So lo and behold, the movie that Eli decides to show them what a movie was he had a VHS player and a tape. He showed them Cannibal Holocaust, which was funny because so it's that, and they thought it was, apparently these tribe people thought it was funny.
Yeah.
They were like, dude, this is the funniest shit ever, because especially because the understanding of like some of these tribes, yes, there are probably indigenous tribes that have been and had been linked to cannibalism and stuff like that. The tribe that they went down to were a 100% peaceful tribe. They were down for the cause to kind of like do this and fun, that like even like a scene I've read too, even in a scene where they were all the people are captured in a cage. The one kids were like, "Hey, we have this snake. We should just swing the snake at these like actors," and they didn't even know about it, and because he like kind of kept it quiet for a minute, stuff like that. But it even came from these kids who were that. And then you think that's crazy and all like that, and then when we're doing a little bit of research for this movie and stuff like that, and you found out about the real tribe and them doing that, they were so happy to be in this movie that they offered Eli's like production company, I think their dress designer or somebody like that, offered like one of their kids, like a 2-year-old kid, and like thank you for putting us on the map and letting us be in this movie and doing all this stuff that we would have never done, because we are an indigenous group, tribe and stuff like that. And they were
Have a
like,
have a child.
yeah, here, have a child. What's such a? I mean, like I said, I get it. They probably have populate themselves very often, and it's considered probably maybe like a thing for them, is like an honorable thing. But unfortunately, I heard that they didn't take the kid, which is, I guess, is in one point a good part. But I think that is kind of interesting when you have that, where it's that what we consider is a thank you versus like what other cultures and stuff like that might do a thank you. And I just think I thought it was cool that they were down. I mean, granted, there were a few of the actors that were in this that were real actors. You had the guy who was the main badass that had the big bullhorn and like the black and yellow makeup. He's a main actor. He's a Chilean actor. And then you had the girl who played the witch doctor, kind of like main chick. She was an actress, and her assistant were an actress. But a lot of the background characters that really don't have very much as far as like lines and scenes or dialogue and stuff like that. Was the one that was kind of surprising to me was the little girl. The little girl was
Yeah.
amazing, but she was legitimately one of the tribes. She wasn't an actress. She was literally one of the tribe people. I thought was really cool. I thought she had, I mean, even though she doesn't really talk very much, just to her I guess a curiosity because of her being a kid and stuff like that, with stuff like that. Like I said, her seeing things for the first time. But I thought that was really, really cool. Like, just having that real world and mixed in with this fantasy world, and they were able to take this tribe that didn't really know anything about stuff like that, like you said, movies, being able to realize that they're not portraying themselves, that was a tribe, a fictionist tribe, and that they understood that everything they were doing wasn't trying to harm them or say that their people or their tribe is bad. Just saying that, like, hey man, there are probably just like anything else, you know what I mean? Like, even in American culture, you had Native Americans. Some Native Americans were peaceful, loving Native Americans, and some were very, very brutal to the point where they killed themselves. They killed other Native Americans. So it's like, it just shows that you can kind of like show both lights without actually demeaning or making anything bad for these guys.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, it's a heavy death count in this movie. It's got a kill count up into the 30s. But the one thing I love when it comes to the end of this movie, which I couldn't help but laugh at, which I'm fully convinced. And if he said this in an interview and I'm right, well, I just didn't see it, hadn't heard about it. But I love the fact that in the credits, the Twitter handles of the actors and actresses are used, which I find absolutely hilarious, because for anybody who isn't familiar with the post production of Cannibal Holocaust, is the director was arrested. He was charged for murder, because they basically old school wrestling kayfabe style. All of the actors from Cannibal Holocaust, they stayed off the grid. They hid. Nobody knew where these actors and actresses were. So everybody was completely convinced that these people were really murdered and slaughtered by this tribe, to the point where the director was actually brought up on murder charges and had to bring the actors to court to be like, here, see, not dead, still alive. Please don't throw me in jail for life or give me the death penalty or whatever. But I love the fact that their Twitter handles are in the credits, which I'm completely convinced is a nod to Cannibal Holocaust, where it's like, hey, for the record, they're not dead. They can be found right here, 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 and here.
Yeah, yeah, that's my that at least that would be my opinion. Like I said, I haven't heard anything either, but that's what I laugh about with with the Twitter handles. It's like, yeah, none of these actors are really dead. No one really died. The crazy thing about this movie too is because the fact that Eli is such a I wouldn't go as far as saying I haven't heard that he's a vegan, but I know he doesn't eat ham because he talks about that before. But I love the fact that none of the animals were killed in this movie, in this movie, where like in Cannibal Holocaust you do see a lot of animals being killed and stuff like that. So I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, I'm assuming, yeah, that's exactly where I would have pointed to. It's like, yeah, none of these guys are, nobody. I didn't kill anybody. This is not a snuff film, especially. I mean, I think it's more of a joke for on his side of it, because I don't think anybody was even thinking that it was fake, or like real, and they like when it killed. Where at least with Cannibal Holocaust, it was so guerrilla styled filmed. It
Yeah.
was so like that it kind of made you think, oh, maybe this is a real snuff film. You know what I mean? So I get that part of it versus like, Eli's doing this with, Hollywood money and stuff like that. Obviously, it's not, they're not, letting them go out and kill. But then, like we said, even if you want to call this a remake or whatever you want to call it, the next movie on Eli Roth's list definitely is a remake. It is a remake. It's a remade, different title, but it's 100% a remake of a great movie, man. But we're gonna talk about everybody's love. Everybody loves freaking Bill and Ted and John Wick. And when he's, talking about Keanu Reeves and answering that door and knock knock.
No, absolutely, man. And I like this movie. I always have, man. I feel it's kind of an underlining gem. I feel like it really doesn't get talked about that much. Like I remember picking this up like at like 12:30 at night one time when Walmarts were still 24/7, and I used to go Tuesday nights when the DVDs were or technically Monday nights when the DVDs were coming out for Tuesdays. Like I would finish watching like Monday Night Raw, and then I would drive to my local Walmart that I knew was 24 hours. And when they'd be putting out the DVDs for the next, to be purchased at midnight and whatnot. And that was one of the movies I remember picking up and being so excited when the physical copy came out. But yeah, it's 100% a remake. I feel like, every great director kind of has one in their arsenal somewhere. But I just think it's also a really, really cool concept because it also has an overall very unique breakdown of like, people's personalities, the way that they're handling their stresses, how they are as real people, and are they or are they not of a certain age. There's so many different ways that my brain goes in this movie, which is what I think I really like about it overall. I don't find it to be an award-winning film. I don't find it to be a overly high-ranking movie. Like if you and I were discussing it in the terms of the obituaries, I don't think it would be right up there with some of our other high scores. But there's a lot of charm to this movie that I've always loved. And plus, I love Keanu Reeves.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I said. I mean, I know this movie has gotten a lot of shit. And like I said, I like it. I think it's a fun movie. I
Yep.
think it's just the crazy madness of both the girls in this film, which we get the reprise of Lorenza from Green Inferno, which at
Yep.
this time was actually dating Eli Roth. So you get to see her back in this movie again. And like I said, I mean, I was a huge fan of the original one, Colleen Camp. I loved her and and Clue, so I love that actress, and I love the fact that they keep the same kind of storyline, very 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 premise of it, very really, really similar to the original one. But
Yep.
yeah, I love it. It's two girls knock on your door, they're raining, you let them in, they start you know doing naughty stuffs, and it's got that thing where, like, in their eyes, it's like, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And like you said, even when you watch this movie the whole entire time, it's like, they keep moving towards him and he keeps going away. You can definitely tell, like, throughout this movie that he's trying to, he's not trying to get with these girls and stuff like that. He's
No,
a happily married husband with a kid and stuff like that. But just like anybody, skin is sin, like I've said a million times, and but eventually, if he keeps pressing and keeps pressing and keeps pressing, it gets to the point of the movie where he's like, yeah, call him an Uber. Uber's coming. Goes to go check them out. They're getting ready. They're supposed to be getting ready to get dressed because their clothes are dry and stuff like that. Gets in the shower, and then all of a sudden, sees them both naked, and one's going down on you and then two are going down on you. And I mean, I would almost say guarantee you that 99 out of 100 guys, if two girls are basically giving you the business downstairs, you're not thinking about your wife or your kid or anybody else. 90% of the time, most men are going to be like, you're not going to be pushing them away. Okay, I'm faithful and stuff like that. Not saying that that makes these guys, makes whoever, these guys that do it, bad characters, but just like anybody else, we're humans, and sometimes those urges and those things happen, and you're just like, you let in, and it's like you said, he's pushing away from it the whole entire time. They're coming on to him, making him trying to do stuff, and it's like that. But everybody has a pushing a boundary where it's like, okay, I'm gonna stay my ground. But obviously in Keanu's world, two girls giving him the business downstairs is enough to go, okay. And after that, all game's fair, man. He's doing all kinds of shit, man. They're having a good old time with the three of them.
Oh yeah, it reminds me so much of of the scene in Single White Female when the girl, like the doppelganger who's trying to take over his wife's life, is blowing the husband, and at first, because he's not paying attention, he just assumes he's getting the business from his wife, but then he looks down, realizes that it's not his wife, but also at the same time, with his piece in her mouth and feeling those feels, he's just like, for lack of a better term, kind of paralyzed in pleasure. And they even talk about it later in that movie where she tried to use it on him and be like, "You saw it was me. You knew it was me, and you knew it wasn't her, but you didn't stop me." Kind of a thing. And but yeah, it's that same kind of way where it's like, the sins of the flesh, overtake the brain at one point. And yeah, they definitely get down in all kinds of like crazy ways. But that's also what ultimately leads to that, like I was saying before, where your brain as watching this movie is in all these different places when you're dealing with, like, your sensibilities, what you're worried about here, what you're thinking about there. You're just trying to be a nice guy here. And then ultimately the curiosities where it's not directly put out there, but the fact that these girls are potentially minors, and not only just minors, but like minors with a capital minor, like very much minors. They're not like on the cusp of like turning 18. They're in their mid-teens potentially.
Yeah, that was the only part of the movie that was kind of weird, though, that I found. Like, like they're like, oh, that we're 15 just to turn 16 or whatever like that. And it's
Yeah.
like, throughout the movie, you can go either way or whatever like that. But it's one of those ones where it's like, then again, do you play that as a fault versus the man, or is that on them? Because like they definitely were telling they were going to a party, definitely were saying that they were 21 or whatever like that, and then all of a sudden now they're not after he had sex with them. And it's like it's one of those ones where like in real life trapments, it's like you've had people where it's like, yeah, these girls have said that they were overage and then all of a sudden wasn't, and once the deed's done and they have like video proof or photography proof or something like that, now they can go after these guys and basically, blackmail them into doing whatever they want to do because nobody wants to go out and no one's going to believe that they thought that they were, that where it's like, yeah, it's like it's the same with this movie. He's just like, yeah, they videotaped them having a little bit of fun, and that was basically like the same thing. They're like, oh yeah, we're gonna send this out to everybody if you don't cooperate and stuff like that. And of course the guy's gonna be like, oh yeah, yeah. And then like I said, especially when you're adding in that extra like underage thing and stuff like that, because it's bad enough to that if they were 21, 22, I mean, what's the worst thing you have to deal with? You have to deal with your wife, right?
Yeah.
Okay. At least it's just that. I'm not saying that that's not that's a good thing to deal with too,
Of course.
but at least if they're underage, now not only you have to deal with your wife, you got to deal with the law.
You gotta deal with the fit.
You got to deal with the law. You got to go more than likely, probably, you're going to get arrested. You're going to probably go to prison. You're going to really ruin your career and stuff like that. And that's the crazy thing about it. It's like throughout this movie, which I love that they push that envelope where they 18? Oh, well, you said I was 15. Oh, maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. Oh no, no, I could drive. Blah 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 blah. I thought you said you were this age. Oh no, we were just lying to you. So you never really know what age group they really are throughout this whole entire movie, which is like part of the mysterious game that they're playing in this stuff like that. But like I said, ultimately, like I said, it's just it shows that both sides of it, but you never know because like I said, it's such a damning game because even if you make a fake accusation, like okay, yeah, my teacher had sex with me. I was a 15-year-old girl or whatever like that in school, and the teacher did something to me. And then all of a sudden it's getting looked at, and then you find out maybe like 6 months, a couple months later that she lied. You still have to deal with that repercussions because even though that teacher has gotten cleared, he still has a little bit of that red tape on there that he had been accused for it. So you're potentially ruining someone's life, and that's how this is. But obviously these two girls don't give a shit about lives because they're talking about how they've done this before. They're getting ready. They love doing what they do, and they do it. They do a dirty game, man. Like I said, it's insane. Like all the trashing of the house and the
Yeah.
ridiculing, and his wife's like doing sculptures, and they're writing all this crazy shit on there to the point where they bury him in his head deep, and then play the video on Facebook and social medias and stuff like that. So yeah, it was just crazy.
Yeah, dude. I mean, it's insane. Like, it's also kind of crazy too. It's like, how are girls of this age like picking this up as a hobby? And that's
Yeah.
always something I thought was so crazy about this movie. Where I was like, that's just fucking weird, man. Like, how it's what girls or any youthful people understanding that youth does bring a certain amount of power to it, but it was still very weird. Like, how would girls of this age just discover this as like a hobby in a way to like extort people? So that was always like really, really weird. But yeah, I mean, that movie with those concepts was crazy back in 2025. I mean 2015 when the movie came out. But could you imagine that movie coming out nowadays, 10 years later, in just peak season of cancel culture and stuff like that? I mean, that's a crazy movie if it was to drop now, you
Oh
know.
yeah.
So I mean, that's definitely an insane thing there. But as we move down the filmography as well and continue on, let's have a little bit of fun as we talk about a little bit of like Die Hard meets Full Metal Jacket meets Adventures in Babysitting as we talk a little bit about Death Wish, my friend.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, yes, Eli Roth is known for his horror and stuff like that, but you know, why not have a little bit of action? Why not have a little bit of a shoot 'em up, maybe revenge kind of type film? And why? And if you're gonna make that kind of movie, who are you gonna get in this movie? Like who you thinking of? Well, you know. everybody loves Yippee Ki motherfucker, so of course you're gonna bring Bruce Willis into this movie. So you got him. Then, like you said, you got Vincent D'Onofrio in this movie, which I love, and then his beautiful wife Elizabeth Shue in this movie. So I just love the
What a
fact,
lucky guy.
yeah, as I said, I was like, man, Bruce Willis, yeah, I love the guy and stuff like that. Not 100% the greatest looking dude in the entire world, but man, I mean, between the women that he's had as far as acting wise as his wives and girlfriends, it's like, geez, man. And then, obviously being married to Demi Moore for a little while, it's like, Demi Moore smoking. So it's like, kudos to Bruce to be able to bring in the girls. But yeah, and like I said, who doesn't love Elizabeth Shue? You know what I mean? That's the whole reason why we've talked about it before. But where Daniel's son might be a bad guy because
Yep.
Elizabeth Shue, man, she was she was swinging between the two of those guys
He
and the
was.
Karate Kid.
No, absolutely, man, for sure. And it's interesting too. I mean, this is a fun like action type movie, very a la The Punisher. As this successful surgeon guy is basically he's just getting working to get revenge on his family, and it's got that Punisher meets the Boondock Saints thing, where it is kind of interesting as because it varies. It's based on the public opinion. Is this guy doing good, or is he just out to fulfill his own little maybe like sick fantasies? Is he really doing it for the safety and the good of mankind, or is he just a butcher? Which is something I always found to be like super like cool about this movie and like really interesting. And it also has a little bit of comedy in it too, because again, it's another retelling, remake, referencey type movie. And one of the other reasons why I bring up the whole Boondock Saints thing is one of the funniest parts that you had pointed out is that there's this rope that he uses in the kitchen, like it just belongs there. Like, why would it even be there? And the thing is, this movie is based off a Charlie Bronson movie, and that was always Charlie's thing. He always had rope around. He always had it available. Like at times that it would not make any sense for it to be there. Why would you carry it around? Why would it even be a thing? It was just such a staple of Charlie Bronson movies. And in both Boondock Saint movies, they referenced, Sean Patrick Flannery's character's just obsession with having rope around because he loved Charlie Bronson movies. So I always just found that to be completely hilarious, that it's based off a Charlie Bronson movie, but they still found a way to make rope awkward in this movie.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like I said, and it's cool too, because like it being that similar, pretty much a remake of the Charles Bronson movie, and stuff like that, where it's cool, but it's got that modernized thing of it too, where it's kind of weird. You have this guy, like I said, he's a surgeon. These people come in and kill his wife and kid. Basically put his kid into a coma, and he's trying to do revenge, but he's not. He's a surgeon. He's not a badass. He's not like it's very like you said, it's very similar to the Punisher premise, but then again, Punisher was a military guy, so
Right.
he already knows how to use a lot of these weapons and stuff like that. Bruce Willis' character is just a doctor. He's just a rich doctor. So I love the fact that how does a rich doctor learn how to do stuff? Well, why not go on YouTube and go online and check out all the videos on how to how to reload a gun, how to load a gun, how to clean a gun. I love the fact that they kind of modernized that and made it where, yeah, if anybody is going around doing anything nowadays, I don't care what you're doing, you're learning how to play a guitar, learn how to cook something, learn how to kill something, learn how to kill people. I don't even care what it is. Learn how to cook people, probably. You could probably find a video online somewhere showing you how to do it and stuff like that, which is just cool. That's a modern day where, like, back in the day, you had to, when you were a guitar player, you had to, like, just teach it yourself, or just like know how to hear like certain melodies or hear certain tones and figure out what string is going to do that and stuff like that, where yeah, nowadays it's so much cooler. So I love the fact that they kind of brought that into it. But then again, it has its negatives too, where obviously in this movie too, the video of him being the vigilante, the Batman kind of type character and stuff like that. Obviously, there's a video of him doing this vigilance, and this girl has it on her phone, but it's in high def, like 4K, multi-billion-dollar camera resolution, and it's got angles that nobody would have gotten from a bar window.
So ridiculous. It kind of reminds me also a little bit of like Spider-Man, the third Spider-Man, like when Peter Parker was feuding with Eddie Brock, and he's like, well, I've got these photos. Well, I've got these photos. It's like, wait, how did you get those shots? Like, I didn't even see the ability to get that angle. And of course, being Spider-Man, he can position his camera any place he wants to get like the perfect shot. But it was just so hilarious when it comes to that. But I always thought that was kind of interesting too. I didn't really pick up on it back in the day when I saw Death Wish, but looking at it now, I was kind of like, that's an unusually sharp video for a cell phone. Like, even nowadays, like, yeah, they've got amazing videos, amazing photos you can take just off a cell phone, but that is so high production that you can't help but laugh a little bit when you compare it, to whatever 7-8 years ago when the movie came out.
Yeah. I mean, and like I said, I love it. That, like I said, when it comes to this movie, like I said, we mentioned the Die Hard. Of course, Bruce Willis' character is gonna go out in a blaze of glory, shooting people up, banging up, getting tore up, and still make time for make time for the tea and stuff like that. So yeah, it's like I said, I love it. I mean, I was a huge fan of Charles Bronson movies to begin with, anyway. Yeah. So it's like so I love this whole the premise of I mean, yeah, had this movie been done a bunch of times, oh yeah, I mean the genre, especially this genre of like somebody killing your wife or your husband or your kids and you're getting revenge. I mean, there's Death Wish, there's Death Sentence with Kevin Bacon, there's Taken with all the Chris Liam movies, stuff like that. So I mean, like I said,
technically Death Race, like the more modern Death Races with Jason Statham.
Yeah. So it's like, these movies have been done so many times and stuff like that, but it's still, I love it. I think it's fun. I think it's cool that he kind of went out of, kind of like, what he did, when he was doing these movies and stuff like that, where he kind of just took himself out of like the horror genre a little bit. And it's like, hey, let me jump into this action. I mean, granted, there are some, pretty gnarly kills in this movie, and like it definitely does have some gnarly graphics and stuff in it, but it's like it was cool to see like this director who doesn't want to pigeonhole himself as just this horror director and does all this horror stuff, that he kind of went, okay, let me go into this action kind of like revenge kind of thing. I like my revenge movies because he's done a lot of those kind of stuff, but let's try that. And then like I said, then it goes right into his next movie where he kind of goes completely off the wall for an Eli movie and does basically a PG-13 kids fantasy, gothic. I mean, is it really kids? I mean,
it's kind of like a Disney horror movie.
Yeah, it's more teenagers, like that kind of, like not little kids, but this movie is definitely more like like your your movies where you have that kind of stuff where it's definitely more geared towards teenagers and stuff like that. But I love that movie, and we're talking about the little a clock that apparently has it in the halls or the walls or somewhere.
Dude, I love this movie, dude. The house with the clock in its walls, dude. This movie is so fun, dude, and I'm just like, bro, this is so cool because it's so goosebumpsy feel, which is also actually a Jack Black movie, but like it's got it's that idea of like Harry Potter, and it's just so it's so cool, because you get this it's basically this kid. Unfortunately, it's very similar, and again I'm gonna reference witches multiple times, obviously, because it's a main key point in this movie, but it's like it reminds me of like, the witches from back in the day with Angelica Houston. But yeah, this kid unfortunately loses his parents to a car accident, goes to live with like his uncle, and then he realizes kind of by accident that his uncle is a witch, or in particular a warlock. His best friend, his uncle Jonathan's best friend, is a female witch, and you know, and basically they inherited the house, or bought the house from a set of very evil witches who, before their death, had been working on a clock that will destroy the world, and it's buried somewhere in the house. So the little boy basically finds out that Jonathan's a witch, like a warlock, basically because he busts him bashing in a wall of the house, while he's continuing this search. And I just love the concept of this movie. There's so many different horror references. It's got a lot of very unique, unsettling imagery that you really think would be very triggering to young audiences. And I do know stories of kids definitely getting upset by this movie. But it's this very dark, it's kind of like the evolution of the Harry Potter movies. I've always said that from day one. I love the Harry Potter movies. I always have. And the thing that always kept me invested was how dark they kept getting, which I know is the nature of the books. But since I only ever read the one book, and I'd love to revisit all the books eventually, but I'd only ever read the one book. But even the movies, because I don't have that comparison, always kept me very invested because of the darkness. Because the first movie, when it went to the second movie, it was like it was a real good jump in darkness. But when it went from the second to the third movie, it was a huge jump in darkness. And then it just kept getting darker, more murderous, and so on and so forth. But I really do love this movie, for people who are fans of who don't necessarily always want to watch R-rated, bloody, gory, mind fuck horror movies. I love this movie for those type of fans, even myself included. There's sometimes where it's like, well, I still want to watch a horror movie tonight, but I don't need to watch Saw, And like I said, I love this movie for that, and I get those major Goosebumps feels where it's dark, it's sinister, it's got little crazy things around each corner, but nothing dangerous as far as watching it as a fan. But I really like what Eli did with this movie because it's not an easy movie to do.
Yeah. I think it's pretty cool, especially because, like you said, his movies have always been those, graphically horror films. And even like I said, even though he kind of switched up the genre a little bit with Death Wish, it was still an R-rated movie where he goes from that and switches it up even more. And this is like the first film he did, without being R-rated. And not only that, the Lorenzo it was in this film, who at that time was his ex-wife. So
Yeah.
he's doing a movie with his ex-wife, which is kind of cool. That I like that, that they probably, had a little bit of animosity, maybe, and they were like, okay, we can be professional and work with each other and stuff like that. But yeah, it also has like just these little subtle things that I love about this movie too, as well. I'm like, of course, my favorite part, probably favorite part of the whole entire movie is the clock with the cuckoo, because it's a devil in it. So of course I'm gonna live that. But I love the fact that, like, reminding of school and stuff like that, not being maybe the best athletic person in the world, but not the worst athletic person in the world. But like in this movie, the kid is a weirdo. He's wearing like, these like, aviation goggles all the time with them and stuff like that. And, they're picking, people for sports and stuff like that. And they picked the crippled kid over him to begin with, and it's just like how bad do I really have to be that you're gonna do a kid? And like I was like not saying like the cripple kid wouldn't be. This cripple kid had like the two arm stilts. He's not gonna be really good at really very much doing anything as far as this sport was concerned. So it's like, yeah, he'd be the worst player to have on your team, and yet they still picked him over that. So I love that. It has that little kid animosity, and like I said, it definitely has that feel of like like you said, the Harry Potterness and stuff like that. I love like I said, and like you said, I love going into those too. Like I said, we're huge fans of like Hocus Pocus and things like that. That I'm completely cool with watching, BG movies and G movies and stuff like that. So it's like, it's that break, but then it still has a little bit of, like you said, a little bit of genre kind of too. It's got a little bit of that evilness, and like, you know, in the character in the movie is reading from the Necronomicon, basically. That's the like book of the dead, you know, to them. And you know, he's raising the dead, and even when the dead zombie comes back, he's pretty gruesome looking. You know, he looks pretty gnarly and stuff like that. So I love the fact that, yeah, even though it is a kids movie, it still has that little bit of element of like, you know, that horror and gothic kind of like, you know, spliced into it, but not enough where, yeah, it's not gonna, you know, it's not, you know, no, you know, nobody's running around, you know, cutting Achilles tendons or popping
Right.
out eyeballs or any of that kind of shit,
No.
which I thought was really crazy and stuff like that, and into it. But like I said, even going into, you know, with this movie and stuff like that too. Again, it's this weird, like I said, it's this crazy trajectory that Eli is on and stuff like that. Like I said, doing that, you know, doing those horror movies and being pigeon goated, then going into, you know, Death Wish and kind of switching genres, then going into a kid movie, and then, you know, he goes into the documentary area and stuff like that, and you know, him being a
With the fish.
huge, yeah, him being a huge, you know, Shark Week guy. He's been on Shark Week, he's been on Talk After Dark and Stark After Dark and stuff like that. To me, you know, he makes Finn, you know, an HBO movie about, you know, sharks being killed and for finning and stuff like that. And to be completely honest, it's probably, in my opinion, the most horrific and most unsettling movie that he's ever done. Like all that other shit's all fake stuff and, you know, fake
Yeah.
gore and stuff like that. It's so disturbing that watching this doc, and it's like that, and this stuff is all real life stuff.
Yeah. And that's the one thing that was also kind of interesting about this too, is like if you, for anybody who, not only who have seen it, but anybody who's also just kind of familiar a bit with like the research of this movie, this documentary, is it had a certain amount of controversy behind it too, because like there was a lot of like kind of back and forth, because you're always going to get those people. And I'm not necessarily going the like the PETA direction of this, but like when you watch something like Shark Week, like for example, Mrs. Vamp is a big Shark Week fan. She loves her Shark Week. And, you know, I love watching the basic documentaries about just kind of learning about sharks, how they feed. You know, I'm also a big like Megalodon fan. So I just love the curiosity of the fact that nobody will ever likely be able to get all the way down into whatever the hell that thing's called, like the trench or whatever, because of how far down it is, and whether any type of submarine or ship type thing could withstand the water pressure to get down there. That there really is a good chance that massive sharks of that size, even if it's just one, is still a thing, because nobody can ever get close enough to know about it. I like that kind of stuff. But this movie it had its moments of darkness because it's so real, you know, where it's got, you're learning, you're being educated, you're learning, you're seeing feedings, you're seeing killings. Like it's very Eli Roth. And I think that's the thing that got most people about it, is, while I think it's a fascinating documentary and I really enjoyed it, you can definitely tell it was a documentary made by a horror director.
Yeah. It definitely, you know, it definitely has its points. And like I said, it's like, you know, being a huge conservationist, for, you know, I'm a huge advocate for shark, you know, conservation, you know, doing all that stuff like that. Because people just, you know, the whole bad thing about sharks and stuff like that. It's insane. But yeah, the thing I found funny about this doc, which I mean, I guess nothing's really funny about it, but I thought kind of interesting. You know, they talk about like, you know, they're cutting the fins of these sharks for
Yeah.
this soup, and where they dry it out and they leave it is basically just like in gutters and rat poop and dog poop, and the one guy called it, you know, he calls it gutter, you know, he called it gutter food, you know what I mean? And you know, these people are spending millions of dollars, you know, thousands of dollars, hundreds of dollars for the soup and this divineness. And even when they went into the guy, you know, at the one part when they went into the restaurant, there was like, he was like, oh, you guys don't clean it? Oh no, we don't need to clean it. This stuff is, you know, comes in perfectly clean. And it's like, yeah, you guys, everybody who's eating fin soup now is basically like been eating shit and dirt, and then they talk about, when it's dirty and clean, they clean it with bleach and all these chemicals. So you're like ingesting all these like chemicals and stuff like that. And then they later find out with all this stuff like that too, that a lot of the shark stuff has like, mercury. So you basically like, you're kind of giving yourself like basically cancers and sicknesses and stuff like that
Yeah.
with it. Not only mentioning, the fact that, like I said, sharks have been around longer than dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff. They've evolved and stuff like that. That they're they're a prime thing for the ocean and stuff like that. So and like I said, I've always been kind of weird about it too. Because even when I was watching it too, I was always like, okay, yeah, I'm not gonna go out and say that you shouldn't go out and kill an animal and be able to use it for food and stuff like that.
Of
Because
course.
that would consider myself a hypocrite because I am a meat eater. So I get it. So I mean, my only main two issues with the shark part of it is that one, a lot of those places are just cutting the fins and then dumping the shark in the water. So
Right.
you're just
So wait.
wasting all that meat anyway. So you're not even doing anything. So that part always pissed me off and stuff like that. And then eventually doing like that. But also like, I eat I eat your typical like anybody else in America. I eat my typical meats that I like, burgers, cows, chickens, pigs, things like that. None of these animals are being extinct. None of them are on the brink of extinction. None
Right.
of them are on a list where they're basically dying off. And you look at these sharks ones, especially even like a great whites when I was watching that. I know some of those sharks were definitely endangered. I didn't realize how endangered great whites are almost now to a
Yeah.
point of extinction now. And that's my whole thing. Like, yeah, like I said, I'm not saying that you shouldn't go out and eat. I mean, I don't think you should, but like I said, you should go out and eat a lion or a giraffe or even an elephant or something like that. Obviously, the elephant wise, at least, is on the endangered list. I'm
Oh
not
yeah.
saying you can't
I,
go out and eat something. Yeah, yeah, you can't go out and eat something that's, if it's on the endangered list or in the thing, I don't care how delicate it was. Man, if they told me right now that the cow population was dwindling so much that within the next year or two there would be no more cows, I probably wouldn't eat burger nearly as much as I do. You know what I mean? Not saying that I would stop, but I probably wouldn't eat it as much because, or even stop to a point. I wouldn't stop eating meat, but maybe not eating burger because I'm like, okay, maybe if we do this, and that's the thing they explain about that in this doc that people don't realize that unlike a lot of animals, especially like fish, they're talking about like in fish when they do that, they lay millions of eggs, they have millions of babies all over the ocean. Where sharks are kind of like us. They don't mate until they're like in their 30s or 40s. They only have a couple babies, and then it's years before if they have any more. So they don't really pop out that much. So the population of these sharks, that's why they're dwindling, because it's showing you that like, yeah, it said like while watching that movie, which is an hour and a half doc, that over 30,000 sharks would have been killed in the time that you watched that movie. And they're talking about how like a million sharks are being killed every day, and
yeah.
or millions of sharks are being killed every year, and 100 billions or stuff like that. You got to realize, you got to take into the fact that yeah, they're not reproducing as much as some other animals that can reproduce a little bit more. That's why they're being instinct, becoming instinct, because of the fact that they don't have the time to be able to make the waters great. So like I said, I found it. Like I said, I'm a huge shark fan. I've always watched Shark Week stuff. I knew a lot about shark, but even watching this, there was a lot of things I just didn't really know about that side of it. And I love the fact that it was more guerrilla too. He goes on the boat and there's some trouble and there's some shit, and they're like, okay, we need to get out of here before somebody gets shot because we don't
Right.
want to see anybody get killed on camera. Which is kind of an interesting fact, because if you know Eli Roth, before he wrote Hostel, he actually wanted to make a documentary about trafficking and people being trafficking and the whole body trafficking of like women and children and stuff like that, but realized that like that's so hard to do because you're going in territories where you're probably going to get killed trying to figure it out. So I
Yeah.
think it's cool that so that's why he made the Hostel movie and stuff like that, and went to the the fiction side of it versus the real side of it. But I love the fact that he eventually got to a point where he could write stuff and do stuff, and he was able to. He's like, he was gung ho. He's like, no, they were saying, like, even in this doc, they were like, yeah, man, I want to go and find these boats, and I want to go talk to these people. I want to go and see all this stuff. And the guy was like, yeah, you don't want to do this, man. This is a cutthroat freaking business. And he did that. And even in one scene where he was like, I want to talk to these people, and like, blah blah blah, the people who sell stuff and like that. And they got approved to talk to a guy at one point. And he's like, yeah, this guy has never talked to any of us in like 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
This and he got to that because they want to prove their side of the story, which, like I said, even listening to them, you can kind of understand, like, they're not completely wrong for doing what they're doing, but then again, it's just like you said, if it's not them doing it, it's somebody else doing it. And you find out, with all the shark fin oil and cosmetics and all that stuff using it, it's like, yeah, he's like, you're killing all these sharks to rub some shit on your face.
100%, man, for sure, Devil. And it's a it's a crazy documentary, man. It's really good. It's very well done, but it's documentaries are often dark, but this is like a definite like dark side to a shark documentary. It's really, really crazy when it comes to that. Now, as we move to towards the end of Eli's current filmography, the one thing that's fun for us to talk about now is you and I have talked about Wes Craven. We've talked about Tobe Hooper. We've talked about a lot of directors on the show, and we've talked about just a lot of directors just in general off the show. And one thing that's always very common to directors is they always seem to have what many deem their own slasher, like somebody that they're known to be affiliated with. Like I said, when it comes to our show specifically, we've got Freddy Krueger with Wes Craven, as well as Ghostface. We've got Leatherface with Tobe Hooper. We've got Pinhead with Clive Barker. Let's get a little bit into John Carver as we talk a bit about Thanksgiving. And also, just for what it's worth, also knowing that a Thanksgiving 2 is currently in the works. So we will have some fun with that at a future discussion as well. But Thanksgiving, stemming off of the many, many years ago now Grindhouse trailers that happened between Planet Terror and Death Proof.
Yeah, that's my huge thing now. When we talk about Thanksgiving, I love the fact that, yeah, it's from a fake trailer and a movie between it, and a lot of those movies have been made. You know what I mean? You've got the Hobo with a Shotgun, you got Machete, you got Thanksgiving, you got all these movies that I think there's only 2 movies now that haven't been made, which is that Don't. And then the SS Werewolf with Women that Rob Zombie's got to make. So Rob's got to get on that. Yeah, I know he's talked about probably never being able to do it, but I'm like, now is the time to do it, man. There's only, like I said, there's like 2 movies, maybe 3 movies on that fake trailer out of all those movies that haven't gotten done. So I was super excited whenever I heard that they were going to do the Thanksgiving. Yes, it's a lot different than how the trailer was to begin with, but you got to realize that trailer is like 15, 20 years later. So
Yeah.
of course you're going to do things a little bit different now, but I love the fact that it goes to than that. And like I said, it still got that premises, and I still love it. It reminds me so much stuff. I love the slasher side of it. I love the fact that, it is, the John Carver character and stuff like that. And you have this, but I love the fact that it's just like anything else. It's got a lot of social, stipulations and, things into it where, yeah, you're talking about like, being people who have worked in retail and stuff like that, the Black Friday sales, where that's how the movie starts off with, man. It's like everybody fucking wanting to get this fucking free toaster or some shit and bucking through the place and breaking it down. And people go, oh my God, yeah. In this movie, yes, it is a little bit more to an extreme of how it really is. But I mean, if you look in the news throughout Black Fridays, there's been places where people have gotten stabbed, stepped on, killed at these things, and stuff like that. So I mean, granted, yes, they're not nearly as frenzy and crazy as they are in the beginning of Thanksgiving in this, Black Friday crazy sale. But yeah, I mean, I just love that he took something is familiar and is a real thing, obviously took his spin on it and put it towards the horror realm of it. But yeah, I just love how that just kind of sets off this movie about like, yeah, you're gonna get some cool shit. And okay, yeah, Eli's done a little bit of stuff that kind of veered from the horror genre, but just like a good dog, you can't keep him down for long enough, and he's going back to the well, and that well is pretty deep and bloody.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, you had the egotistical like star athlete who was like gonna sign like a multi-million-dollar like baseball contract, but because he wanted to get on in the action, wanted to take advantage of this sale or loot or just make stupid kid choices, gets knocked over, his arm gets stomped on and broken, and but it's just kind of crazy with that one. But I love the simplicity of the concept because there's certain simple concepts, especially in horror, that I just really like because they make for good movies. Again, doesn't make them Oscar worthy. Doesn't mean that they're gonna, be super duper like, you know, highly rated, but they're gonna be universally enjoyed, I feel. And the simplicity behind just basic slasher revenge is what I really like about this. The revenge, because you also find out where, you know, one of the reasons that the killer was the way he was is because you thought that the death of this one person was causing the downfall and spiral of this person, which, don't get me wrong, it was. But then you find out that it was also causing the spiral of a secondary character that you didn't realize was even affiliated. And then you find out that it's because adultery is involved. And that's what I've always loved, is where the twist is, but why the twist is where it's at, and how is it that way, where you're looking at, okay, well, this person is committing these crimes because they feel that they were wronged due to the death of this person, where most of the time that also makes them the prime suspect more often than not. Sometimes the movie shows that they were right the whole time. Other times you find out that they were wrong and it was really this person. But to find out that the person involved in these slayings as a high-ranking official, because they're so distraught over the death of the person they were fucking, who they weren't even with because they were married to somebody else, that's what caused them to snap, because they were like, we were, seconds away from running off together and starting our life. And you guys, because of your stupidity and greed, robbed me of it. It's like, look, dude, I get it, but you weren't exactly playing the morals game correctly either.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I mean, movie wise, yes, that makes that premise and your observation makes sense. Me as a real person watching this movie, I agree with them. I was pissed. You have fucking Gina Gershon in this movie. I'm like, hell yeah, and then you're gonna kill her in the beginning of the movie. I was
Yeah.
so pissed. Fuck you, Eli. I'm with Patrick. I'm killing everybody for fucking killing Gina Gershon way too early. You're
Oh,
gonna
don't get
tease
me
me
wrong.
with her.
I'm with you on that, Devil. Don't get me wrong. That doesn't go unnoticed. It's Gina Gershon.
Yeah, yeah, I was like, son of a bitch, Ginger Gershon's in this movie. Yes, son of a
Wait,
bitch, he died like early. What the fuck, man? I was so pissed. But yeah, I mean, that's what I love about this too. And it's like, yeah, Eli's back, and he's back with a vengeance in this movie.
yeah.
Like, this movie is gory as fuck. You're cutting people up, hanging them on like the Walmart fucking signs and shit like that. Like, the shop area that looks like a Walmart. Half the bodies on it and stuff like that. You got decapitated heads and a Thanksgiving dinner, and like this movie is definitely like going back to those old school hostile cabin fever kind of
Yeah.
feels where, yeah, he's like, okay, yeah, I need to do something horrific again, and I need to shock some people and do some shit, and yeah, I love it. I love the fact that, yeah, it's you don't know who the killer is the whole entire time, and you're kind of thinking, is this one person, and it's that person, and then all of a sudden you realize who it was, and you're like, okay, why? And then you find out why and stuff like that. But I love the fact that they use that, they use like the lore of like John Carver, and this whole Thanksgiving town and stuff like that, where they're doing all this kind of stuff, and yeah, I just love that, and who doesn't love an axe being used properly throughout the whole entire movie. So
Yes, give them the axe. No, 100%. And you've got a little bit of comedy mixed in there with just the unique yet still oddly placed just turkey mascot for a little bit of like comic relief. So, I can't help but get a little bit of a chuckle out of that. But I don't want to go too hardcore deep and, rip apart. And I don't mean that in a bad way, because I truly love the movie, but I don't want to go into too much of a deep dive and a crazy breakdown on this movie, because it is still pretty fresh. And I know that there are people, that are out there still discovering it, checking it out. The cast of Thanksgiving, Eli himself, have really been making the rounds lately too in horror cons, which I think is absolutely awesome. But let's come to our finale currently when it comes to Eli Roth, because I guess we kind of have to.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not personal, Eli. Don't get me wrong. It's not personal. And give me a second, Devil. Like, I just need to put this out on Front Street. Like, this movie is not my style, my genre. While, look, I can appreciate the little bit of Mad Max-ness to it. I will put that out there. Like, that kind of, apocalyptic style is very much my alley. Everybody knows how much I love all the Mad Max movies and how much I care about that style. I get it. But overall, I knew very little, as in next to nothing about this movie. I had to be educated by you and Mrs. Vamp that this movie was even kind of a thing, based off video games and whatnot, because I am definitely not what you would call a gamer. So I'll let you take the lead on this one, man, and I'll chime in when it's applicable. But I mean, shit, like I said, Devil, I mean, I guess we kind of have to. So let's talk about Borderlands, which unfortunately, we always seem to end our directorial episodes on a downer. And unfortunately, this episode is going to be no different. But at least with Eli, we know we've got more coming.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I'm gonna start it off right to begin with. I'm probably in the very small minority of. I actually thought this movie was really fucking good. I liked it. It was fun. I myself am a gamer, but I never, I'm old school gamer, so I
Yeah.
never played Borderlands. Never knew anything about Borderlands. I knew that it was a video game, but I've never played it, so never had any characters. So for me, it was one of those movies that I watched it as a movie straight up. It kind of reminded me a little bit of like the last Avatar with the new movie, where a lot of people bitched about that, but then rightfully so, from video games and stuff like that, you have fans that want certain things to be certain ways and stuff like that. So I get it. Same thing with Borderlands. A lot of people were bitching about certain characters and certain actors that played these characters and played those characters, and they wouldn't have done this and they wouldn't have done that. So me going into this movie with a blank slate, other than the fact that most gamers hated this movie, people who were Borderland fans as far as the gaming wise destroyed this movie. But then again, I go back into it again where, yeah, I mean, video games in general in movies haven't really done very well.
Yeah,
There are a few that are ones that have done well. Some ones that have done well more than what I would think, like Resident Evil. I was a huge Resident Evil fan, but I wasn't really a fan of the movies. I thought they could have been a lot better. I think they should have been a lot darker. I wish they would have done the George Romero one, but that's for another story. But anyway, stuff like that. You've got like Alone in the Dark. That was horrible. You got Doom. That was horrible. There's all these really bad horror movies. So like
House of the Dead.
yeah. So when it comes to
They
these
even
horror,
tried to make a video game movie out of it, like splicing in
yeah.
video game things, and I was just like, stop.
Yeah, so when it comes to like video games and stuff like that, even though people are gonna shit on it, look at all the other video games out there. This movie is probably the one of the better ones because versus like other ones. But anyway, like I said, I liked it. I thought it was a fun movie. Like I said, I love the girl character in this, where she got the little, the rabbit ears, and she's just being mischievous the whole entire time. I love Jamie Lee Curtis. You
Me
know,
too.
I love Kevin Hart. There's times where I can do without him. There's movies that I don't really care for him that much. I don't think he was a bad in this movie. I thought it was decent. And the big dude that they had that was the strong guy that was in it, I thought he was a fun character in this movie. Like I said, I enjoyed it. Like, was it the greatest movie I've ever seen in my entire life? No, it definitely wasn't. But like I said, I watched it from beginning to end and didn't have any problems with it whatsoever. I thought it was fun. I thought it was entertaining. It had its comedy moments. It had some cool things in it that I haven't seen in other movies. So like I said, when it comes to this take for this movie, it's like, yeah, it's, I know and like I said, I'm in the minority when it comes to it. But like I said, I don't know. Now, like I said, on the other hand, if I would have been a Borderlands fan, then probably yeah. Because like I said, I can go for as far as arguing the Resident Evil one, especially that first Resident Evil movie. I was a huge Resident Evil fan. The only reason why that movie was R-rated was because at the very end you saw a split second of Mila Jovovich's bush, and they had to make it an R. That movie was not scary. That video game was scary as shit. When you were
Yeah.
playing that game back in the day, you had to play it in the dark because if you had lights on, you couldn't see 90% of the shit on the screen. So you had to play it in the dark. Then the dogs would jump through windows and scare. I mean, people, like I said, when we grew up playing that video game, dude, I've probably broken a couple controllers just from going, oh shit. So like that game was, and like I said, it was like the zombies, and it was freaking graphic as hell, and it got graphic and more graphic. And like in some of the Resident Evil movies that came out, I don't mind some of them. Some were decent and some were others. But like I said, as far as video game wise, like I said, it was just one of those ones. Like I said, I think Silent Hill is probably one of the better of, as far as horror genre video games putting
Absolutely.
into it. Other than maybe like some Japanese ones, stuff like that. Because I'm a huge fan of like Dead Alive, the series that they had and stuff like that, where the video game and stuff like that. But like I said, when it came to this movie, I don't see that much of a bitch about it. But like I said, I'm not that big into it. Same way with the new Fallout that came out. I was not a huge Fallout person. I've never played the game and stuff like that. I found that series really good. A lot of people are on the mix of that one. There's some people that played the game said they like it, some that said they don't. The only ones recently that I know that everybody's on the 100% on the up is that The Last of Us.
Yeah.
Everyone says that game is like literally that show is almost word for word, page for page for all that kind of shit. So when it comes to like video games, like I said, especially newer video games, I'm out of the loop with all these crazy ones. So like I said,
Mhm.
I came into this with knowing that people were bitching about it. I knew that it wasn't a very popular movie, whether Eli did it or anybody did. I don't think a lot of the bitching really had to do with Eli of it. They just didn't like certain
Yeah.
characters and stuff like that. I mean, I don't think he wrote any of this stuff. I think he just basically directed it. And like I said, he took a stab. He went back from doing what he's always done, where he went to a completely different genre. He came back to Thanksgiving and gave us that horror, that what we want from Eli Roth, and then went back and go, hey man, I'm gonna do something different. And went into the gaming genre and stuff like that. So, I mean, it can't be too bad. I heard rumors that Borderlands 2 is coming out, but that doesn't necessarily mean that anything good, because Alone in the Dark had a second part. Resident Evil's had like 42 of them already now.
Silent
So
Hill had a sequel.
yeah, so just because a movie is bad doesn't always mean that you're not going to get a sequel, but just
Yeah.
because it's good doesn't always mean you're not going to get a sequel either. So
No, for sure, brother. And I'm definitely with you on that. Like, I like, again, I'm not the world's biggest gamer person. I don't pretend to be. I enjoy the Resident Evil movies. I enjoy them pretty much throughout the whole series. I love Silent Hill. I think of video games put to movies. I have Silent Hill as my number one uncompeted against, movie in that genre. Um, and like I said, I was the cleanest slate when it came to Borderlands. And there were enjoyable parts. Like I said, I love apocalyptic Mad Maxy type movies. I care about that stuff. So I enjoyed it that way. I like Jamie Lee Curtis. I've always been a fan. Who doesn't love Jamie Lee Curtis, whether it was in Halloween or whether it was in Freaky Friday? I've always enjoyed Jamie Lee Curtis's work. Kate Blanchett is Kate Blanchett. I'm indifferent, but I enjoy her work. She's a pretty face to look at. It's cool. I did like the bunny ears girl because it kind of gave me also a little bit of that Tank Girl feel with Lori Petty, and I love Tank Girl, and it's about as absurd as it gets for that kind of movie. When it comes to Kevin Hart, I'm just indifferent. I'm not what you would call a Kevin Hart fan. It's not personal. I have yet to find somewhere to connect with him, and it may happen. It may not happen. For the longest time, I was not a Will Ferrell guy. Even still to this day, it's just not his style of comedy is not my cup of tea. Movies like, fucking Superstar and his over the top dramatic comedy that he was taking off of things like Saturday Night Live wasn't my cup of tea. Doesn't mean that there weren't things that I didn't enjoy. I still think that More Cowbell is the gold standard of skits for SNL. But my point is, I started getting Will in smaller doses where he wasn't the star, and that's what kind of started loosening me up and getting me into Will Ferrell movies, where he's a main player, but he's still a secondary character in Old School. But I loved that movie. His little cameo appearance in Wedding Crashers I thought was elite. I just thought it was so hilarious. And then I started getting movies that I was genuinely enjoying, like Talladega Nights and Blades of Glory, which I just thought were so fun. Completely absurd, but still super fun. So anyway, bringing it back to Borderlines as we wrap this up, that's kind of my take on it. As a clean slate, blank slate guy, I found it relatively enjoyable because I had just like what you said, I had no basis for comparison. I didn't have anything to be pissed about. But knowing that people had already been just so drastically shitting on this movie, and even Mrs. Vamp was like, she hadn't even seen it, but was like, oh, I've already know that they fucked this up. Because again, she's way more the gamer than I ever will be or ever was. So she could very much relate to why they were mad about that kind of stuff. But anyway, look, it's cool. It's fun. It's very bright. It's definitely colorful. It's not a dark movie, but we'll wait and see. And they have talked about a Borderlands 2 movie. If he's involved in that as a director, I guess we'll have to wait and see. I don't think I've officially heard whether he's on to direct that as a sequel, because for people who may or may not know, there are multiple Cabin Fever's movies, and he is not a part of those. There's a third Hostel movie, and he is not the director of that. I had to kind of remind myself of that because I've had the third Hostel movie in my collection ever since it came out, and I had forgotten that he wasn't the director of that movie. I'm sure he still makes money off that movie because it's a concept of which he wrote. So I'm sure there's certain royalties that he probably still collects off that. I wouldn't be surprised if certain royalties off the other two Cabin Fever movies he's probably involved in some way, unless he's whatever, sold off the rights, I guess, however it works. But anyway, that's also another deep dive for another day. But yeah, when it comes to it, Fangs and Infernos, look, when it comes to Borderlands, make your own decisions on that one. Devil and I aren't here to tell you that this is a must pass, because both of us come from two different ends of the spectrum. We're similar in our beliefs that it's a cool little quirky, enjoyable thing, but Devil's more of that gamer aspect where he can understand the disdain more than I can, versus I look at it where I like these things about it because of my nature, but I don't know shit about it. So I can't bury it for something I know nothing about. So Fangs and Infernos, make your own decisions when it comes to those. But overall, Devil, as we wrap this up,
I want to piggyback on that Hostel. So so the good thing about it that we have news for, with Cabin Fever, I'm not 100% sure what you were talking about with rights and stuff like that. But, Hostel 1, Hostel 2, written, directed by, Eli. Hostel 3 wasn't. There are and it's been approved and it's been up in the word that they are making a Hostel series, TV series,
Yep.
and he is directing and writing it. So he is going back to the Hostel world again. So, and like I said, for people who did it, I mean, like I said, go and watch Hostel 3. I mean, if you want. That's where I leave it at. Yeah, you could definitely tell that Hostel 1 and Hostel 2 were done by somebody like Eli, and Hostel 3 was definitely about as far away from Eli as you can get. Other than the fact that you have the only good concept that I believe that I liked about it was sort of like how we talked about with Leprechaun being in Vegas. It's a Vegas movie. Vegas
Yes.
has a lot of sin. So I get that concept of it, but then again, the world that they're in makes it kind of a little bit harder to do what you do in a city like that. Not saying that people don't disappear in Vegas all the time
Oh, sure.
and people don't get killed, but it's a little bit easier in a third world country that no one's really paying attention to as much versus, why are there, all these people being killed and stuff like that versus like
Yeah.
Hostel
Like when
3
you
and
can
stuff.
communicate easily with everybody else that's around.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, there's some good news. Like I said, we have that, the Thanksgiving too, and that's what I like about this one, versus some of our other directors because either the directors we've talked about so far have either passed away
Yeah.
or probably more than likely just not going to do anymore. Clive's getting up there in his health and stuff like that, so I'm pretty sure we're probably not going to get anything more directed by Clive Barker.
If
Would I
anything,
love
we'll
it?
probably get a book or two.
Yeah, yeah. Like, would I love another movie directed by Clive Barker? Hell yeah, but unfortunately, probably won't. Same thing with Dario. I think Dario's to a point where in his age that we may get another Dario movie, but it's probably not as common. Where someone like Eli, we're more than likely going to get another, you know, 30 years plus of Eli movies. So
Yeah.
we'll have to. Well, this one we'll be able to come back to the well and maybe do a director's part two for Eli. Maybe in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe somewhere around season 666 or something. Maybe we'll revisit, where we can get into Thanksgiving 2, the Hostel series, and anything else that he's definitely given us. But we do love our Eli Roth Devil and Fangs and Infernos. He's doing the con circuit. There's multiple cons that have brought him in. So if you're a fan of Eli's work, he's very accessible right now. So definitely get out there, support these cons, support these actors and actresses that are making appearances, and get your merch signed up. And somebody like Eli, who's already put together such a fun, cool, very different direction catalog as well. But it definitely seems that he's steering a little bit back towards the horror. Again, you do get the opportunities with Borderlands, and who knows the opportunity that he was presented with also to go that route of that more gamer sci-fi direction. But anyway, since we know we're getting Thanksgiving 2, we're getting him back onto the horror train, again, also with the Hostel series. So onwards and upwards there, Fangs and Infernos. We definitely look forward to seeing more about what Eli Roth has got for us. As always, Fangs and Infernos, we appreciate you guys so much for checking us out, rocking out with us. Make sure that you're subscribing to YouTube. Make sure you're following us on Facebook and Instagram. And, of course, courtesy of our nearest and dearest Rock and Horror apparel at rockandhorror.com. You can get your Vampire and Devil merch and rock us all the time. We got shirts, we got hoodies, we got tanks, we got those devilicious booty shorts, and of course, a tip of the cap. We've got those as well. We appreciate you, Fangs and Infernos. We're signing off for Eli Roth, and it was a great conversation as always. Horns up. Fangs out.